It began with two pink suitcases sitting side by side on a rain-dark bench in Central Park. If you've ever seen something that didn't belong a child's toy on an empty street, a glove in the middle of summer, you know the kind of quiet alarm it sets off inside you. That's what made billionaire Lucas Hale stop. Not his phone buzzing with stock alerts, not the drizzle that dampened his $1,000 shoes, just two little girls no older than 5, sitting perfectly still beneath the stone arches of Bethesda Terrace, their fingers locked together like they were holding on to the world. One look, and Lucas knew something was wrong. Before I tell you what he found, let me ask you this. If you saw two children alone with suitcases in the rain, would you stop, or would you walk past like everyone else did? Stay to the end of this story because what he discovered next would change not only their lives, but his forever. Lucas was 32, the kind of man who signed contracts worth more than small countries and forgot to eat lunch. He'd come to the park to clear his head after a brutal day, 5 meetings, 1 betrayal, and the gnawing truth that success hadn't made him feel anything in years. The last thing he wanted was a scene. But as he walked closer, the taller girl lifted her chin and met his eyes. That was when the younger one whispered something that froze him where he stood. It's been 4 days, 4 days. Lucas knelt the drizzle threading through his hair. 4 days since Mommy went to get food and work, the older one said. Her voice was small but steady. She told us to wait right here. She said not to bother anyone. Not to bother anyone. The words hit like a slap. Behind them, the Angel of the Waters statue gleamed faintly through the mist, her bronze wings streaked with rain. Everything about the scene looked ordinary until you saw the details. The girls' jeans were stiff with dried mud, their sneakers mismatched. On one suitcase handle was a ribbon braided pink-white-pink, on the other white-pink-white. Between them sat a Polaroid photo half tucked under a strap, a woman with dark hair laughing a small crescent scar under her chin. Scrawled in black marker across the bottom were the words, "For my brave girls, N." Lucas picked it up carefully. "Is this your mom?" The younger one nodded. "Her name's Nora." He tried to sound calm. "And your name's I'm Ava," said the taller twin. "She's Lila." They were mirror images except for one thing. Lila wore a tiny beaded bracelet with colors arranged in a repeating pattern. She kept tracing it with her thumb like the motion helped her breathe. "Have you eaten?" he asked. Ava hesitated. "We shared a pretzel." Lucas exhaled slowly, fighting back the instinct to fix this the way he fixed everything by paying someone else to handle it. Money couldn't feed them fast enough. Money couldn't make this not be what it was. He crouched lower. "How about something warm? There's a diner right over there. You can see this bench from the window. I'll leave a note for your mom. If she comes back, she'll know exactly where you are." Lila clutched her sister's sleeve. She said not to move. "I know," Lucas said softly, "but it's getting cold and rules don't matter if you're freezing. I promise we'll keep watch from the window." Ava studied him, cool, cautious, far too grown for her age. "Do you have a card? People with cards keep promises." Lucas smiled despite himself. He handed her one. "Hale Capital." On the back he wrote in bold marker, "Ava and Lila are with me. We're at Ellen's diner by the terrace. We can see this bench. We'll come back if you come. Lucas Hale." She read it twice, nodding like a lawyer signing a contract. Only then did she rise, lifting the suitcase that was nearly half her height. Lucas carried the other. The cases were disturbingly light. Inside the diner, neon reflections rippled across their faces as they ordered chicken soup and pancakes for later. While they ate, the girls spoke in fragments that built a picture no adult wanted to see, sleeping under the bench when it rained, taking turns keeping watch, sharing whatever scraps they found. Every sentence was careful, like they were afraid of saying too much. "Why didn't you tell anyone you were alone?" Lucas asked. Ava's eyes dropped to her bowl. "Mommy said if we were good and quiet, she'd come back faster." He had no reply for that. Somewhere between the flicker of neon and the steam rising from their soup, something cracked open inside him, a memory of his little sister gone before she ever turned 5, and of a promise he'd once made to look out for her that he never kept. When the plates were empty, Ava pulled out a folded strip of paper from her suitcase. "Mommy left this," she said. On the paper, written in hurried ink, were the words, "If I'm late, go where angels are painted. Sit near the stairs. Wait where the music echoes. I'll find you." Lucas looked through the window toward the archway of the Bethesda terrace, the ceiling painted with golden tiles, and the fountain beyond it crowned by the angel of the waters. "That's here," he murmured. "She said angels can see better than people," Lila added. Lucas swallowed hard. "Then we'll trust the angels a little longer. But first, you're coming somewhere warm tonight, you have my word." Ava frowned. "And if she comes while we're gone," he tapped the glass with the back of his card, "she'll read the note, and she'll see you safe. I promise." Outside, the rain had turned to a silvery mist. The violinist beneath the arch began to play again, something haunting, beautiful, unfinished. Lucas led them back to the bench, his mind already mapping security cameras, contacts at the NYPD, every favor he could call in. He'd tell himself later that it was logic, not feeling, that made him stop. But in that moment, watching two tiny figures hold hands beneath the angel's gaze, he understood a truth money had never taught him. Some things you save because they remind you what being human feels like. And somewhere in the park, a camera blinked to life, catching the moment that would unravel everything he thought he knew about loss, about family, and about the woman who left 2 pink suitcases in the rain. By the next morning, Central Park looked almost ordinary again. Joggers glided past tourists, snapped photos by the fountain, and pigeons resumed their noisy congress near the benches. But for Lucas Hale, nothing about it felt the same. He stood near the spot where he had first seen the 2 pink suitcases. The note he had left was gone. Maybe the wind had taken it, or maybe someone had read it. Either way, Ava and Lila were safe now, asleep in the guest room of his penthouse, the sound of their breathing steady and small. He'd promised them they would not be invisible again, and that meant finding their mother. He began where she had told them to wait where angels are painted. The phrase had burrowed into his mind overnight. Lucas scanned the terrace and its mosaic of arches, noticing details he'd never seen before. The chipped tile edges, the faint graffiti carved under the stairs, the way the echoes made whispers stretch into something ghostly. He showed the Polaroid photo to a pretzel vendor who worked the same spot every day. The man squinted, shook his head. Never saw her, but those 2 little girls, yeah, quiet as ghosts. They'd sit for hours, didn't even cry. That was what haunted him, the word quiet. They had learned to survive by disappearing, but invisible wasn't the same as safe. By noon, Lucas had spoken to 3 more people, a street violinist, a park cleaner, and a balloon vendor. All remembered the girls, but none remembered a woman with a crescent scar. They didn't ask for anything, the cleaner said. That's why nobody called it in. Kids who don't make noise don't get noticed. Lucas felt the weight of that sentence settle into his chest. How many children vanished behind silence? How many people like him, people with power, walked right past because the suffering wasn't loud enough? He sat on the edge of the fountain phone, pressed to his ear, calling in favors he hadn't used in years. Within an hour, a security contact from the city's Department of Parks sent him grainy footage from a surveillance camera near the archway. A blur of motion, a woman's shape, 2 children. The timestamp matched the girl's story 4 nights ago. but the footage ended abruptly as the camera pivoted away. No clear face, just a flash of that distinctive pink-white ribbon tied to a suitcase. "Can you enhance this?" Lucas asked. "Not much to enhance," the tech said. "She's gone off frame. Looks like she walked toward Fifth Avenue. Could be anywhere now." He stared at the screen at that single frozen frame. Gone off frame. It felt too literal, too cruel. He rubbed his temples, remembering how Lila had traced the beads on her bracelet, whispering that it was a song. A code, maybe, or just comfort. Either way, it was all they had. He left the park and started following the street that led east toward Fifth. Rain clouds hovered low, the city gray and heavy. At a newspaper stand, he showed the photo again. The vendor shook his head but pointed toward the corner. "There's a busker plays there afternoons. Sees everyone." The busker turned out to be a young woman with wild red hair and a violin case patched with stickers. When Lucas showed her the Polaroid, she frowned. "Yeah, I saw her." She was crying, not loud, just leaking tears. She bought a hot dog for the kids, said something about the hospital uptown, then ran toward the crosswalk. "I thought she'd tripped, but maybe she was hit." I heard brakes. That word hospital lit a fuse in his mind. He thanked the woman, handed her a folded bill she refused, at first, then accepted with a shy nod. As he turned to leave, she called out. She dropped this and held up a crumpled receipt. It was for a silver ring, dated the same day the girls had been left in the park. The bottom of the paper bore a faint smudge, 2 digits written in pen. 12. Room number locker code. Lucas took it like it was evidence in a trial. The logical part of him clicked into place. Every success he'd ever had came from patterns, details, timing, precision. He called his driver. "We're heading to Mount Sinai Hospital, and bring the photo." Inside the hospital lobby, the smell of disinfectant mingled with coffee and exhaustion. The receptionist looked up polite but guarded when he explained what he was searching for: a woman, dark hair, small crescent scar. "We see hundreds of patients," she said. But when he showed her the photo, her eyes changed. "Wait here," she murmured, and vanished into the back. Lucas waited, pacing. Behind the desk hung a bulletin board filled with anonymous thank you notes and lost and found tags. One note caught his eye, a child's handwriting, wobbly but clear. "Thank you for helping my mom. She's sleeping, but I know she'll wake up soon." The name at the bottom stopped his breath. "Nora Carter." The receptionist returned, flustered. "Sir, I can't release patient information, but there was an accident near the Dakota building 4 nights ago. Woman in her 30s, no ID. Critical condition. She's in the ICU room 12. Lucas didn't wait for permission. He moved down the hall like gravity was pulling him. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and whispers. Through a half-open door, he saw her pale, motionless tubes and monitors blinking in quiet rhythm. The scar under her chin caught the light unmistakable. He stepped closer, hand trembling as he placed the Polaroid on her bedside table. "Nora," he said softly, though he knew she couldn't answer. "Your girls are safe. Ava and Lila. They're waiting." A nurse entered, startled. "Are you family?" "Not yet," Lucas said, "but I gave them my word." He stood there until the nurse gently ushered him out, his throat burning. Outside the ICU, he sat on a plastic chair staring at the ring receipt in his hand. Invisible wasn't safe. Quiet wasn't peace. And this woman, this stranger who had trusted the world enough to leave her daughters under an angel, deserved more than silence. That night, he drove back to his penthouse. The city lights blurred through the windshield like tears on glass. In the back seat, Ava and Lila slept curled against each other, their small faces finally calm. Lucas looked at them through the rearview mirror and felt something shift. He had found where their story might end, but it was also where his would begin. The morning light slanted through the glass walls of Lucas Hale's penthouse, spilling across the marble floors, like a quiet reminder that life could look beautiful, even when it was unbearably complicated. Down the hall, he could hear the faint hum of cartoons, Ava and Lila curled up on the couch, still in the oversized shirts he'd borrowed from his housekeeper. Their laughter, soft and unsure, broke through the sterile silence of his world. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong in a place built for deals and deadlines. Lucas stood at the kitchen counter staring at the coffee machine that hadn't been used in months. He'd spent most of the night replaying the hospital scene in his mind, Nora Carter pale, and still a stranger who somehow had rearranged the entire structure of his priorities. The girls didn't know yet. He couldn't tell them until there was something solid to hold on to, hope, maybe. But even hope felt fragile in his hands. When Ava walked in, she was carrying her sketchbook. "We drew something," she said. Lila followed, dragging a blanket like a cape. They placed the picture on the table. 3 figures stood under the angel of the waters, the twins holding hands, and beside them a tall man with messy hair and a coat too long for his body. "That's you," Lila said proudly. Mom said angels send helpers when they can't come back right away. He swallowed hard. "She's right," he said quietly. "It should have been simple. 2 children, 1 missing parent, 1 man with more resources than most cities." But life wasn't an equation, and Lucas had learned long ago that the hardest part of helping was not fixing what wasn't yours to fix. He spent the day making calls, lawyers, doctors, social services. He wasn't naive. 2 unattended minors in his care without formal custody raised every kind of flag. By noon, a caseworker from Child Protective Services arrived, a woman in her 40s, with clipped speech and the kind of eyes that had seen too many stories that started with good intentions and ended in disappointment. Her name was Marion Clark. "You understand the situation, Mr. Hale," she said, setting her notepad down. "You can't just keep them here, even if you mean well." "I found them in the park," Lucas replied, keeping his voice level. "Their mother is in the ICU at Mount Sinai. I've confirmed it. She's alive, but in critical condition." Marion hesitated, scanning the documents he'd printed, the Polaroid, the receipt to the hospital admission form. "You did all this in less than 24 hours. I've had practice moving fast," he said dryly. She looked at him for a long moment. "You have to understand, Mr. Hale, people like you. People with means sometimes think they can rewrite the system. But children aren't mergers. They're not assets to manage." Lucas leaned forward. "Neither are they cases to file away. Those girls spent 4 nights sitting in the cold, waiting for someone to see them. I did. Now I'm not looking away." Something softened in her expression. She closed her notepad. "You can apply for temporary guardianship while we confirm their mother's identity and condition. It's not permanent, but it'll keep them safe." After she left, Lucas stood in the middle of his immaculate living room, watching the twins build a blanket fort out of designer cushions. They were small, but the energy they brought into the room was enormous. It filled the spaces between his walls, the ones money had never been able to reach. That night, as the city lit up beyond his windows, Lucas found himself telling them a story. Not one from a book, but his own. About a boy who grew up in a small town with a sister who loved the rain and believed puddles were secret portals. About the day he'd promised to walk her home from school and got distracted chasing a ball into the street. About how she never made it home. He'd never told anyone that story before. But Ava listened like every word mattered, and Lila rested her head on his arm as if she somehow already knew. "You kept your promise to us," she said sleepily. Lucas smiled faintly, still working on it. After they fell asleep, he walked to his study, opened his laptop, and started searching. Nora Carter, nurse, 32, no criminal record, no family listed in New York. But there was one old reference and application at a clinic near St. Patrick's Cathedral, dated 2 years earlier. Attached was a note written in clean, confident script: "I believe healing is a form of love." The next morning, he took the girls to that very cathedral. He didn't tell them why. Inside, the air was cool and scented with wax and incense. The choir was rehearsing for Sunday Mass children's voices, rising into the vaulted ceiling like light. Ava stood still listening. Lila closed her eyes, humming quietly. That song she whispered Mommy used to sing that. Lucas approached the choir director, a tall man with kind eyes. He showed him the photo of Nora. The man studied it, then nodded slowly. Yes. She volunteered here sometimes, taught the kids basic first aid. Kind woman. Said she used to hum lullabies to patients who were scared. He hesitated, then added, "Last time I saw her, she asked about donations for a children's wing at a hospital downtown. She seemed worried. Said she was behind on rent." As Lucas thanked him, something fell into place. Nora hadn't abandoned her daughters. She had been trying to hold on in the only way she could. That night, back at the penthouse, he noticed a pattern on Lila's beaded bracelet he hadn't before. Pink, white, pink, pink, white, white, pink, pink, white. He recognized it suddenly as a code Morse-like deliberate. He translated it using an app on his phone. The message spelled 12 Hope. Room 12, the ICU, Hope. It wasn't random, it was her way of saying she would come back. Lucas closed his eyes, the weight of understanding hitting him like a tide. He went to check on the girls sleeping now in their fort, breathing softly in sync. He pulled the blanket higher around their shoulders and stood there for a long moment. He had built empires, orchestrated takeovers, and crushed competitors, but he had never built anything that mattered until now. Behind him, the city shimmered in the window glass, vast and indifferent. Ahead of him, 2 small hearts beat quietly against the night. When he finally sat down, he whispered to himself, "Some doors open and some never close. Maybe this one isn't supposed to." The next morning, he signed the guardianship papers. The door he had opened for 2 strangers was now something else entirely, something that reached into the one place he'd kept sealed for years. His past hadn't gone anywhere. But for the first time, it didn't scare him. It reminded him why he'd stopped that day in the park, because sometimes the people you save are the ones who save you back. The rain had stopped, but New York still glistened like it hadn't decided whether to move on or keep crying. From the window of the hospital's private recovery wing, Lucas Hale stood watching the street below. The city looked like a living organism, restless, relentless, and utterly indifferent. But today that indifference was breaking. It had been 5 days since he found Ava and Lila under the arches of Bethesda Terrace. 5 days of searching, pleading, and waiting. Now, finally, something was changing. In the room behind him, their mother, Nora Carter, lay pale but alive. Machines hummed softly beside her, steady but fragile, like an old song played on a scratched record. The doctors called her progress encouraging. Lucas didn't believe in luck anymore, but he did believe in effort, and he wasn't leaving until effort turned into hope. He turned as the nurse entered. "Vitals are stable," she said, checking the chart. "It's a good sign. Sometimes patients respond when they sense familiar voices." Lucas nodded. "They're here." He stepped into the hall where Ava sat coloring on the floor and Lila was carefully lining up juice boxes on the bench. "She's resting," he told them gently. "But you can talk to her. She might hear you." They followed him in quietly, small hands gripping each other's. The air inside the room was cool, the kind of cold that makes you whisper. Ava climbed onto the chair beside the bed. Lila took her mother's hand, tracing the IV line with a tenderness that made Lucas's throat ache. "Hi, Mommy," she said softly. "We're here like you told us. By the angels." Ava looked up at Lucas. "Can she see us?" "Maybe not yet," he said, "but she can feel that you're here." The twins began to hum a slow, gentle tune. It took him a moment to realize it was the same pattern from Lila's bracelet. Pink, white, pink, pink, white, white, pink, pink, white. A code turned into a lullaby. The nurses had paused by the door, their faces softening as the sound filled the room. And then, almost imperceptibly, Nora's fingers twitched. Once. Twice. The heart monitor beeped higher. Ava gasped, and Lila froze her hand, tightening around her mother's. Mommy Lucas moved closer, heart pounding. Nora's eyelids fluttered barely, but enough. Enough to make the entire room feel smaller, sacred. A nurse hurried to the bedside, checking vitals, murmuring quick instructions. Lucas didn't hear any of it. He was watching Nora's face, the faintest movement of her lips forming a single breath of sound. "Emma." Lila pressed her forehead to her mother's hand. "It's Lila, Mommy. We're here." Nora's brow furrowed like she was pulling herself back from a long distance. Her eyes opened halfway unfocused but alive. She turned her head, finding the sound of her daughter's voices, and the smallest smile broke through the exhaustion. "Ava. Lila." Tears slid down Ava's cheeks. "We waited, Mommy, like you said." Lucas stepped back, his chest tight, not wanting to intrude on the sacred geometry of reunion. But Nora's eyes found him. Weak, questioning. He could see the recognition of something unspoken. Her daughters were safe, and this man had made sure of it. "I'm Lucas," he said quietly. "You left them a note. I just followed it." She blinked slowly, a tear escaping the corner of her eye. "You found them." "Yes," he said. "They're safe. You can rest now." The nurse touched his arm gently. "We'll keep her under observation. She's stable enough for short visits." Lucas nodded, stepping into the hall to breathe. The corridor smelled like antiseptic and overworked hope. He leaned against the wall, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. He'd watched billion-dollar companies rise and fall without flinching, but this, watching a woman fight her way back to her children, this was the kind of power he'd never known existed. Later that evening, when the twins had fallen asleep on the sofa in the family lounge, Lucas sat beside the window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered, reflecting off the glass like constellations that never rested. His assistant had left him messages about meetings, shareholders, contracts. None of it mattered. He'd already decided he wasn't going back to that world, not yet. There were things worth more than winning. He pulled the Polaroid from his pocket, the same one he'd found on the suitcase. 3 faces frozen in a better time. He turned it over. The words, "For my brave girls." N stared back at him now, carrying a weight he could finally understand. He traced the ink with his thumb. "You did good, Nora," he murmured. They never gave up. In the days that followed, Nora grew stronger. Her voice returned faint but sure. She asked questions about the girls, about how he'd found them, about the park. Lucas answered each one simply without embellishment. But when she asked, "Why did you stop that day?" he couldn't lie. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe because once someone didn't stop for me." Her eyes softened, tired but kind. "Then I'm glad you did." News spread, as it always does. A CEO taking in 2 lost girls a mother found. Against all odds, it was the kind of story people wanted to believe in. Reporters called it a miracle. Investors called it a distraction. Lucas called it something else entirely, the first time in years he'd felt human. One afternoon, Nora's doctor approved limited time outside. Lucas wheeled her into the hospital garden where the twins waited with paper crowns they'd made from coloring pages. The moment Nora saw them running across the grass, her laugh broke open, a sound that felt like sunlight. Ava climbed onto her lap. Lila hugged her waist, and for a second the whole world stopped pretending to be difficult. Lucas stood a few steps back watching. The nurse beside him whispered, "She's a fighter." He nodded. So are they. And maybe so was he in his own quiet way. Not fighting for profit or prestige, but for something that couldn't be measured on any chart, a family that wasn't his by blood, but had chosen him anyway. As the sun dipped low, Nora looked up at him from her wheelchair, her daughters tangled in her arms. "You stayed," she said softly. "I promised I would," he replied. That night, back in the city's glow, Lucas walked alone through Central Park. The same path, the same bench, now empty but forever changed. The angel of the waters watched from above, silent and steady, her bronze wings gleaming in the moonlight. And for the first time in years, Lucas Hale felt peace, because sometimes the city sees everything but only a few moments make it blink. This was one of them. 6 months later, New York had thawed into spring. The kind of season that makes even the busiest people stop and notice the trees. Lucas Hale was one of them now, slowed down, grounded in a life that no longer revolved around earnings reports or quarterly projections. His mornings didn't start with emails or conference calls. They started with laughter cereal spilled on the counter, and two small voices arguing over which sneakers went better with sunshine. He had promised himself he wouldn't become sentimental, but that promise had lasted about a week. Ava and Lila had that effect on him. They didn't ask for much, just presents, patience, and pancakes on Sundays. Their mother, Nora Carter, had moved from the hospital to a small apartment Lucas had arranged near Riverside Park. It wasn't charity. It was a chance one she'd earned through courage most people never find. Every day, Nora grew stronger. She was walking now, still cautious, but determined, her steps echoing with purpose. The doctors said her recovery bordered on miraculous, but Lucas thought it was something simpler, willpower fueled by love. She'd started part-time work at a neighborhood clinic teaching young nurses how to care for patients with both skill and empathy. When she smiled now, it didn't look fragile anymore. It looked alive. Lucas spent most evenings with them, usually bringing dinner or just stopping by to listen to Ava's newest big plan. They had a way of making his penthouse feel unnecessary, so he stopped staying there. He told himself it was temporary, but he knew the truth. He belonged here more than anywhere else. One afternoon, while Nora was at the clinic, Lucas took the twins to Central Park. It was their ritual now, a quiet homage to where it had all begun. The bench under Bethesda Terrace had been freshly painted, and beside it stood something new. A young tree with a small plaque at its base. It read, "For the ones who wait and the ones who come back." The girls tied 2 pink ribbons to its branches. "It's our promise tree," Ava said proudly. "If anyone gets lost, they'll know someone's looking." Lucas smiled, feeling something in his chest tighten in the best possible way. "It's perfect," he said. They sat on the bench, sharing ice cream, watching the boats glide across the lake. For a long time, nobody spoke. The city moved around them, noisy, endless, but here in this small circle of calm, it felt like the world had learned how to pause. When Nora arrived later, wearing her light blue nurse's uniform, the twins ran to her, arms outstretched. Lucas stood to greet her, and for a moment neither said anything. They didn't have to. Everything that mattered was visible in the air between them, the gratitude, the unspoken history, the strange, beautiful thing they'd built out of chance and choice. "I saw the clinic's new program on the news," he said. "The one for single parents." She smiled. "It's called the Second Chance Fund. We help parents who fall through the cracks, people like me." "Not like you," he corrected gently. "Because of you." Nora looked down at the girls who were dancing near the water. "You know, I used to think I'd lost everything," she said. "But it turns out I was just being redirected." Lucas nodded. "You were never lost. The world just hadn't caught up to you yet." They laughed softly at that, but there was truth in it. Neither of them had expected this strange, quiet family they'd built. It wasn't defined by blood or law, but by something steadier, the decision to stay. That evening, they all walked home together, the city glowing around them. Nora held Lila's hand, Lucas carried Ava on his shoulders. As they crossed 72nd Street, the twins began singing the little tune from their bracelet, the one made of pink and white beads, once a code, now a lullaby. The song drifted into the noise of taxis and laughter, and became part of the city's heartbeat. When they reached Nora's building, she paused on the steps. "You know, she said, I used to think angels were things that lived above us, but I think they live next to us instead." Lucas met her eyes. "Some of them sit on park benches," he said. She smiled, but it was softer this time. "Some of them don't even know they are." Inside, the twins sprawled across the couch, exhausted from play. Nora tucked them in, kissed their foreheads, and turned to find Lucas still standing in the doorway, watching. "Stay for dinner?" she asked. He hesitated only a second. "I was hoping you'd ask." Later, after the dishes were stacked and the twins were asleep, they sat by the window. The city lights spilled across Nora's living room, the hum of traffic fading into something peaceful. "You could go back, you know," she said. "To your company, your old life." Lucas shook his head. "That world will be fine without me. But this one," he gestured to the apartment, to the faint laughter still echoing from the hallway. "This one needs me to show up." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Then stay." It wasn't a grand declaration, just an invitation spoken quietly between two people who'd already chosen each other in all the ways that mattered. When Lucas finally left that night, he walked past the river where the city met the sky. He thought about everything he used to chase control, success, perfection, and realized he didn't miss any of it. What he'd found instead was something infinitely rarer meaning. The next morning, commuters would pass a small plaque in Central Park, maybe pause long enough to read it, maybe not. But somewhere, two little girls would look up from their breakfast, see the man who had once stopped for them, and know that kindness had built a life big enough for all of them to belong. Some stories end in grand gestures or perfect endings. Theirs didn't. It ended the way real love does not, with fireworks, but with steadiness, with showing up, with keeping what matters and building what lasts. When we look back at the story of Lucas Hale, Nora Carter, and the two little girls who changed everything, Ava and Lila, what we see isn't just a tale of coincidence or charity. It's a story about the quiet power of compassion and the unspoken ways life redirects us when we least expect it. Lucas began as a man who had everything: wealth, success, and influence, but none of it gave him peace. Nora, on the other hand, had almost nothing left but the fierce love for her daughters. And yet it was through lost vulnerability and the courage to keep going that their worlds collided in the most extraordinary way. In a city that never stops moving, one man stopped, and that single act changed 4 lives forever. Lucas didn't just rescue 2 girls. He rescued parts of himself he didn't know were missing. Nora didn't just survive an accident. She rebuilt her life with strength, grace, and purpose. And the twins, those bright little hearts who learned to wait, hope, and forgive, became the bridge that turned strangers into family. What we take from this story is simple but profound. Real wealth isn't measured by what we own, but by what we choose to give. In a world often driven by speed and self-interest, kindness remains the rarest and most transformative currency. Sometimes the smallest act, pausing to notice someone else's pain, can be the beginning of healing, not just for them but for us too. In your own life, there will be moments that ask you to stop, to listen, to care, to act when it's easier to look away. When that moment comes, remember Lucas's choice. because you never know whose story might begin the moment you decide not to walk past. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that goodness still exists in unexpected places, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, and share this video with someone who needs a little hope today. Your support helps us create more stories that touch hearts and remind us what truly matters.